Right.
And there we are. So, hello, Alex. How are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm very fine. By the way, for all the folks connected in live, I am Andrea Laus. I'm the founder of Skill Gym, a company developing digital role plays for helping first-time managers develop their uh, capabilities in critical and leadership conversation. And how about you, Alex?
Thank you, Andre. It's good to see you. I always enjoy our time together. So my name's Alex Fischera. I live in Dallas, Texas, a little ways away from where you are, but we love technology for that reason. Brings us together. Former professional athlete that, once I was through playing, I want to continue taking a lot of the things I had learned into the private sector and business. So I'm the owner of Intuito Group. It's an HR consultancy helping companies better handle their investments in their human capital. And we also do a lot of coaching, training, development, executive coaching, leadership development, and heavily leveraged Skill Gym. And it's been great, our relationship, to just see it grow and everything going on. So excited to be here, excited to talk about all the great conversation and points, and glad to have everybody that's here.
Great. So this is one of many conversations we're gonna have, a kind of random conversation around very important topics that deal with leadership conversations, first-time managers, but not just first-time managers, leaders generally speaking, and how much it is important to upskill those people with conversation.
I couldn't agree more. Um, Back when we first started talking about conversations in general, and this is where I think you and I started to really get a comfort for each other, was in my professional sports background. Developing skill was a very essential part of taking yourself to that next level. There were things that you can grow, and at a certain point, everybody kind of evens out, but you have to develop beyond that and put in time. And it was repetition on specific things that really helped you excel. And I see conversations as exactly the same sort of importance for a lot of leaders managing teams. I often make a lot of comparisons to sports, but there's, in business, there are teams, and there are players with roles, and there are managers, and there are owners of it all. And so the conversations are so important, and really because most people that have researched, looking at people's time and where it's spent, would say about 80% of your time as a manager is going to be involved in conversation. And, when you look at, essentially what you're paid for, right? Where does your salary go for? A lot of people think, well, it's delivering results. But you got to go a step back and say, well, how do you get those results? And oftentimes it's going to be based on the conversations that lead to the results. And so you want to kind of invest in getting better at conversations, as we'll talk about, for multiple reasons, but it's hugely important, specifically because the majority of your day is going to be interacting, involving several different types of conversations.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In fact, when you say that the typical answer for managers about what they do all day long is about bringing results or generating results, well, in fact, I would argue that that's not their job. I mean, the job of delivering results is about their reports. Their job should be about making sure those people deliver. And the way to do that is through conversation. So I would say that conversations are not the vehicle, they are the goals of managers.
And that's the title of really our topic here today. We talk about the transition.
Yeah, let me share the slide, by the way. Sorry.
No, it's okay. But you helped me trigger it a little bit that's exactly when we talk about somebody moving from a position where they're at into a leadership role, a manager role. That is one of the biggest transitions in any business, is moving, because it's the individuals moving out of a sole contributor to creating multiple contributors. And you were spot on when you said the biggest difference is you're no longer really held to producing those results. You're helping others produce them. Yeah, you've done it yourself. Now what the company is trusting you with is the ability to bring others together to share your experience and get multiple, return on results. And so you're absolutely right. That's why conversations for managers are important. It's the vehicle to help generate those results.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk today a little bit about what is your experience about delivering smart coaching on conversation for first-time managers using and leveraging digital role plays. I think this is a very good starting point for our discussion. What do you think? Well,
Personally, a lot of the work I do, it's revolutionized the way I do a lot of work. And it was, what was it? It was about maybe almost a couple of years ago that I kind of came and opened up a conversation with you and your coworkers about it. And I had sat down with, I said, this is really interesting. It's very, at the time it was something not many people were looking at, this idea. Everybody was talking about playing scenarios. Everybody was talking about role play, but they weren't taking it to the digital platform. It wasn't, being done in a sort of, role play online and interactive. And it was very hard to find anybody who had done that sort of to the level of what we see in Skill Gym. And, but you knew the effects and you knew the positive impact role playing would have. When you sit down as a coach or you sit down in a group and you're working through scenarios, well, what did you think here? And how did that come back? And did you meet your objectives? And, you get a significant amount of impact. But when I started to see that it was now placed into a digital platform and not only be able to have that conversation still, first of all, it helped with certain workflow. I mean, when we look at the industry today and businesses today, one of the toughest things as an outside consultant or coach is being able to really understand that company's workflow, the bandwidth of managers and leaders and what they can actually do. A lot of times you get, and I'm sure you've heard it, we're too busy right now to train or develop. They're too busy. And I don't want to believe that's the answer, because most people, when they say too busy, that means it's not a priority for them. And I would ask the follow-up question, and no business owner tells me that developing leaders and first-time managers is not a priority. So busy wasn't really the answer. And I had to cut down through to the real causation. What they were saying were that the solutions were not appropriate for their culture, for their environment, for their leaders. Yeah. And it wasn't working with them. So I'll pause there, but that has had the biggest impact, was being able to provide a solution that met my clients where they were, versus trying to get them to fit in and subscribe to something that was being directed towards them.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. By the way, I think that transition between individual contributor, from an individual contributor to a first-time manager, is definitely the most important transition in their own career. I mean, they can have a career giant steps afterwards, but still is nothing compared to the big difference, the huge gap between being an individual contributor and a first-time managers. And by the way, let me share with you one survey that we recently had with some of our clients. I'm sure you can see the screen, can you?
I can, yes.
Well, that was a survey we ran through our clients, and here we are talking about 800 employees as a panel, and we asked them a very simple question. That was, is your manager good at conversation? Very straightforward, very straight to the point. And look at that. I mean, almost 90%, or reasonably 85% of those people were not happy about the way their managers were dealing with conversation. And that's really, really something that, I mean, makes me think about that. What do you think about this?
It's extremely consistent with what I see. First of all, simplification on the question is paramount to getting accurate data. And again, you've asked a very simple question to get very accurate data. Most people think you have to ask an elaborate question to get the real point, but you're really capturing exactly what's there. And And I see it, you know, I'll pick out a small piece of it. I'll give you an example of exactly where I see these results, what I'm told. Performance reviews. Now, most companies probably just came out of end of the year performance reviews. We're now into sort of the next year, but it's sort of still recent. And when I work with a lot of companies, they set these performance reviews at one time at the end of the year, and then they don't see you again for another year.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, so how much work are you going to get then in a performance review if you're only doing it once every year? Apart from loathing the fact that you're that you're having to do them, which I get a lot of times. Oh gosh, you know, performance reviews, I got to get after it. You know, you're not really brushed up on your skills on it, and so that translates to the people that are there. So I don't just hear it from the managers giving the performance review. I get to hear it from those that are in the performance review. First of all, coming in once a year, it's sort of like, whoa, you know, there's this sort of anxiety around coming in there that you're going to talk about a year's worth of work in this one conversation.
Yeah.
And they get in there and, you know, they don't feel that those results shared there. They just kind of like, you know, I don't know if they're really good at giving feedback or at, you know, continuing to lay out goals and priorities and checking through on things. And so
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where I see a lot of the data as one example is in performance reviews.
Yeah. By the way, let me say hello and welcome to Henry, who is with us today. Hi there.
Thank
you.
I was just kind of sitting there in the background. I'm kind of sitting in a lobby area, so there's kind of some sounds kind of in the area, so I didn't want to have that overwhelming the conversation, so I've muted myself. But yes, it's I can mirror kind of everything that both of you are saying and contribute that way. But I'm not astounded by those numbers at all. That's pretty much on par from what I've seen.
Good. So thank you for joining us, and feel free to drop in whenever you want, ask questions or comments. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Just as a little side, Andrea, I know Hank, and he's very involved in the HR industry. So when he says he notices those numbers, I believe him too. So.
I mean, I see that everywhere. I mean, we are having several of these webinars, and everyone on this point. I mean, there are two things that all the time make me blow my mind. One is that 80% of the time of managers is spent on conversation. This is something people don't realize until they take the measurement, and that's really amazing. Yeah. That's their job, but that's where I would say that conversation are the goal of managers. They are not just a vehicle, because you can't spend 80% of your time doing something without recognizing that that something is your job. This is one point. And the other point is about those figures that I just showed before, which says that basically 85% of individual contributors, everywhere you ask them, they will tell you their managers are not that confident with conversation. So the two things need to find a match.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add in there as well that when I'm looking at you know, just training and development in general for leaders, one thing I noticed heavily, and it's actually backed by several studies, McKinsey and several others, large consulting firms that have looked into this, that one of the biggest things that companies are asking for are solutions that the training is then actually applied into everyday activities.
Let me show you this slide. Meanwhile you talk, let me share this slide. You're reading my mind, man.
And traditionally, oh yes, there you go. And traditionally, a lot of the methods, solutions, the form in which training takes, you know, big chunks of time, you know, heavily on information. But what I also found was that a lot of the trainings and solutions ask the participant to put a significant amount of their professional equity on the line when it comes to implementing those techniques. And what I knew about, and this is where another sports analogy was, when you've got a game on say on a Saturday or Sunday, your week is set to practice. You have 5 days of training in which you can try on new things. You can, take some reps, and then it's okay to, suffer some consequences, but no real impact. And you can really work out things. No coach ever says on game day, hey, I want you to try something new today. I mean, no, don't try something new. Go, And so it was apparent to me that a lot of the trainings and solutions that were being offered to leaders never crossed that threshold of saying, let's create an environment to which you can feel that you can, and we'll talk about this, you can build your confidence ahead of putting it into practice. And so, Skill Gym became a necessary part to say, let's take our training offline a little bit, let you work on it, let you experience things, get some feedback, challenge your own assumptions about how you handle conversations before you go put it in to what I would consider the game day. Because, I mean, people work most of the week, 5 days a week. So when is the practice time if you're working all the time? And so that's another thing I'd say that's transformed the people I work with.
Yeah, the reason why I put this slide here is because it makes me think about a couple of things, actually. The first one is that there is such a huge amount of effort in delivering knowledge. But knowledge is volatile. And when I say volatile, I mean that when you collect some knowledge at any point of your day, you think that will stick with you for long. You're really convinced about that, but that never happens. I mean, after a few hours, you will forget about that. That's volatile. I mean, you get the knowledge, there's a spike in your, in your feelings, like I know something more, I am more empowered, but the reality is that that's gonna fade away very, very fast. This is one point, and this comes together with the idea that anywhere you go, anywhere I go and I talk to a lot of corporate trainers, they are so focused on knowledge delivery that almost all their programs are around knowledge. So either you go in class or you go for follow-up or whatever else you do, everything is about making people understand by delivering knowledge. I'm not saying this is something you shouldn't do. That's absolutely important to do that, but that's just the starting point. It can't be the goal. That's just the starting point to enable those people to start off for the next step, which is about gaining experience. And I have a lot to say about this. But first, I would like to hear from you. What do you think about that?
I mean, it's why I really enjoyed this slide, is because the potential disconnect between, what we think we need versus what we are hearing we need. And the sort of left side, or the traditional offer here, is really that sort of top-down approach to saying, oh, I know they just need information. I know I need to give them more information about how to deal with this sort of conversation or this one. But what you have found out, and you got it backed here, is that it's about what the training needs and what the person that's actually going to be in the trench, that's having the conversation, what is it they need? They need to apply it. They need to build the skill. They can acquire some of this knowledge over time, but they're saying, hey, I've been thrown into the mix here. I mean, I need to practice this stuff. I need to really be applying this if I'm ever going to develop and streamline. I hear that all the time, is we didn't get our leaders, or our managers just aren't getting it fast enough. And they're sort of sitting there kind of looking at it saying, well, maybe we just give them more knowledge. We'll bring in some more, workshops, or we'll bring in some more content and give it to them to help them study and get better. But it's the streamline, anybody who's listening, or anybody who's picked up any sort of skill before, you've got to do it. You've got to repeat it. You've got to apply it over and over. So.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. And by the way, this is even more true when you point the finger on conversations, because there is nothing like conversation where you really need to practice, and knowing how to deal with a conversation is just as good until you enter the conversation. And then everything changes, because if you didn't that before, you start getting out of your comfort zone, you start sweating, and you don't know how to deal with that. And the immediate result is that you will do less and less of those conversations, which is the norm out there.
Totally agree. And I think why conversations have flown under the radar is because most people think they're good enough at them, so they don't train them. It's saying, are you good at a conversation? Yes. So, and this is something I personally have seen in my own growth and development from somebody who is, in an industry of where this is where I work with people on this, and I have to apply it in my own business and those I work with. I've always been told I'm a good converser. I have great conversations. I can speak very well. There are some conversations I really struggle at, and Skill Gym has really helped me better understand in what ways and how to get better at it. But, a lot of time it flies under the radar because if we think we're good at it, we won't work on it. And it's one of those things that it's, if you ask somebody in an interview, are you good at having conversations? Most of them are going to say yes.
Yeah.
And we'll get to it here, I'm sure, in a little bit. Where Skill Gym really succeeds for me is in the measurables, knowing if you are good or not in certain parts, in certain conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Having that knowledge.
Yeah, those will be there in a minute. But first, there is another point I would like to share with you. Again, let me share again this slide. And this is really in my opinion, the most important slide we can talk on, because it says another thing to me. Let's define experience, because I always talk to corporate trainers that tell me, look, practicing on simulated conversation is very good for first-time managers, but the more you advance in career, the more experience you already have, that's not for them. I couldn't disagree more, and I tell you why.
Me too.
Experience is something that, of course, is, let me say, the compounded effect of what you have lived so far. However, the real problem is that real life experience is too slow.
Yeah.
That's the point. I mean, it lacks acceleration factors, including emotional feedback, metrics. You were just mentioning metrics before, and many other triggers that we can talk about in a few minutes. And those are acceleration factors because they will turn the experience you do in a simulation into something that it's immediately useful for your daily life. Instead, and this is a kind of weird, it's a paradox because you wouldn't believe that, but instead your real life experience is not that usable straight away because it requires more and more time to happen over and over again, because the quantity of feedback you get to turn that experience into a lesson is so tight, is so small. So when I talk about experience, and let me go to the next one, when I say that in training, you have the problem of supporting managers, and especially first-time managers, in developing their experience in conversation. Of course, today, what I see here is that training is more and more about anything else but conversation mastery. And so you definitely need to think in terms of, let me see if, here we are, to move from knowing how to do conversations or whatever else into something like trying out yourself and develop your own experience. But this cannot be left to the self-volunteer or whatever of people of going through that afterwards on their own just because they have to in real life. What do you think about that?
These are great little points to draw out when we're talking about sort of the breadth of it all here. And my own experience having made the transition, but working with those in that transition, when a manager is now taking on a different role and bringing together other people and working with them, and we already talked about 80% of their day is in conversation. I really like speaking to the decision makers in a company and really having them understand the importance of where conversations and really applying them. Because a lot of business owners and decision makers are looking for, how do we increase engagement? How do we increase productivity? How do we shave time and things of that such? And it comes down to these initial conversations, especially when we talk about turnover and retention. That manager's first few conversations are going to leave a very big impression on his or her team, and in building trust right from the start. And so the impact of being able to if you know that you're going to be transitioning somebody into that next role, getting them started on developing these skills ahead of time. Hey, maybe they're in the pipeline and we know this is going to be a future manager or a leader, is to be a little bit more proactive and say, well, if we get them up to speed training now, when they hit the ground running, they're building, you're multiplying time instead of taking time away what they're doing. Their conversations become opportunities to build trust. They become opportunities to save time, so they don't have to have two conversations instead of one. So it really is a sort of a preemptive sort of kind of development. And yeah, getting them to transition from how to do it to getting in there and getting it done. So
yeah, absolutely. It's a compounded effect as long as you can afford to deliver the right solution for making sure that that experience really sticks in a fast lane.
yes,
Be very fast, because of course people have little time and we can't afford managers to build their own experience in normal life. By the way, we don't have to forget that people join and leave managers, not companies, not organizations. And so that's why it's so important for managers to speed up their pace of learning about conversations. And real life is not enough, is not fast enough, and knowledge transfer made by traditional training strategy is not enough at all. So that's where digital role play can help, and coaching through digital role play can help. What is your experience here?
Hank, did you want to bring something in there? I wasn't sure if you wanted to or not.
Yeah.
I was kind of listening to what you guys were saying. I wanted to get a better grasp on it. But Alex, we attended that seminar on the millennial experience of having millennials in the workplace, and how they are so much different than the traditional workforce that's out there now. That going back to the previous slide of the learning and development in the traditional kind of way of doing things, and then what the actual employee needs are. With millennials, they need to be a lot more engaged, and there needs to be that step up of managers to engage those employees and make them feel active, appreciated, and part of the organization. If they're not part of the organization, they're more than willing to be gone. And that's that turnover that you're talking about that, is so costly for the companies that it's really just what I have found in this instance is that if you have managers that effectively coach their employees, then by coaching the employees find answers kind of on their own, but with manager support, and they feel more engaged. They feel more in tune with being part of the organization, so they're less likely to say, my needs aren't being met here, or the learning and development process is not working for me. If they're engaged, they're part of it. They're willing to stick around. So that's the only point that I was going to make.
Yeah, that's a great point, Henry. Thank you for saying that. I totally agree. I couldn't agree more, because once again, managers are the ones who magnetically bring in people, or they just let them go. And that really happens through conversation. So Alex, I would like to go here to the next slide, if you don't mind, and let me just share it with you. Hold on a second. There we are. So I prepared these slides to let you tell me something from your experience about role play, because of course we know that the most traditional way of delivering practice on conversations is role play. And maybe some of the people who are watching this live or the recording of this session today, maybe that they don't have a real understanding of what a digital role play is. And we will talk about that extensively in a few minutes. But before going there, maybe you want to tell me something about role plays and especially the pros and cons in your experience about traditional role play. Because someone could ask, why can't I continue to use role plays the usual way we have done so far? What's your opinion here?
So I've used role play for quite a while now. I really enjoy bringing in a different way to flex people's understandings of what they're doing and to get them to see different sides and to sort of elevate areas of feedback and really work in the areas that the manager's working in, not get so, high level that we're not in their world. And so role play helps you kind of specifically work within their day-to-day. What are they experiencing? What things are really challenging them? And so you want to draw it out with role play. There are limitations though to role play. And one of them is really creating the context for the role play. It's a lot of people may assume that creating a scenario is a pretty easy thing. Well, you just think about a scenario you've been in and then slap it out there on a board and we start talking and role playing. But actually there's quite a bit of depth to role playing. If you want it to be successful and you want it to really engage the individual, I've done several role plays where you start off great and then you get 2 lines into it and there's more discussion about how this role play or scenario doesn't fit or something. And so you're gone, right? Like done. Then, there's obviously and Hank sort of touched on this a little bit, maybe to a certain extent generations, but where we are from a technology standpoint and a general workflow standpoint, managers and leaders are being asked to do more with less, and time is one of those things that is held so tight to everybody. Everybody's so guarded on their time. And so to ask an individual or a group to set aside things to come in, a lot of them have to travel to come into a central area, to put aside time to do it, becomes, it works once in a while, but then they start to think, oh, okay, it kind of is like, well, what could I be doing with this time? And so a lot of it became, the impact of it. The third point I would make about where the transition from traditional role play to a digital format is in the measurables, the metrics, and being able to recall those in a very sort of efficient, timely manner. To track analytics of a role play without an algorithm or a digital platform is a significant loss in sort of impact that you would have using that style of development. It's been paramount to, so if I can share just a couple of examples of how I use the digital. So one is the scenario of where one-on-one coaching with leaders and managers, to where they and I'm sure we'll talk about this. Skill Gym is great about setting reminders and being able to schedule it out and being able to, and really people are shocked when you say they expect, oh, I got to be doing these once a day, every day for how many months. And it is when they find out what, and you and I have talked about sort of looking at the charts and the graphs of where performance is actually found and peaks and where it stabilizes. People are usually astonished. I don't want to say how little time, but it's not what they think. It's really not. And that sort of is like, great, we break through that barrier. But when I work with them, so they go through their conversations, the coaching calls that they work with me, or our coaching sessions, we go right into the system, and I study those analytics before I get on with them. I look at sort of where their numbers are, where they struggled, and it not only is it a system of building their skill on conversation. Our conversation from coach to client is now centered around context, real substance that we can look at and have a discussion, not this sort of, oh, what I thought, or maybe a little bit here. We have very, very accurate and raw data to generate meaningful conversation and begin to have a depth to our typical coaching sessions. So
that's amazing. We'll come to that in a minute. Let me just share another quick slide that summarizes what you have said so far, and let me add just a few points taken from my field experience. So basically, I was reflecting on what role play don't deliver and why they don't deliver. And you mentioned probably all of them. I have just a little few comments. For me, the point number one is about scalability. You mentioned that in terms of letting people not, making sure that people don't need to travel, save their time, and making sure they are much more efficient. But I would like to give you one different angle about scalability. Because in my opinion, scalability, the most important part of this is making sure that one single individual can play more and more in a consistent way. So for me, scalability is, of course, also about saving costs, making it more efficient, and allowing more and more people to play role play. But that's just one small part of the big cake. The most important ingredient is to make sure that whoever is going to play role play, he can do that consistently over time for several times in a row with a specific rhythm or pace. That's the only way you change your behavior. If you go back to the sport example, I mean, you can't become a champion in tennis by just playing once in a while. You need to play consistently, constantly, and making sure your discipline takes over. And scalability is this what I mean. And you can't achieve that with traditional role play. You can do that by going digital, and we'll see that in a minute. Then, of course, you mentioned the measuring side. One of my favorite old saying, which remains very true, is that what you don't measure, you don't change.
It's true.
That's a key point. I mean, and once again, role play, the traditional one, you don't measure objectively. You can deliver one, let me say, biased and subjective way of appreciation or feedback, but still you don't measure objectively. And as long as you want to scale up in terms of consistency of practice, you need to deliver objective measures, which can help people to understand where they were at the beginning, where they are now, and where they're heading to. And then last but not least, I just took a note about playing safe. One of the major downsides of role play, the traditional one, is that people feel judged. I mean, you're there with a lot of people around you. You need to play a role which is not yours. And as you mentioned, people start discussing about the role play itself rather than your own performance. But the reason mainly is because you don't feel safe. I mean, you feel uncomfortable. And that's where digital role play comes safe, because you can play it on your own, in your office, in your room, with your headphones on, nobody bothers you, and still your coach, like you have done so many times, can still take a look at what's going on. They can monitor your progresses, and they can check out your gaps and help you improve. That's a very, very important point.
Can I just tag on to those two? And your point on scalability is so true. And it brought me back to somebody telling me, we were discussing, you know, why they have a conversation a certain way, or why their managerial style is a certain way. And what they said was, well, that's the way I was taught. That was the way I was trained. And when you talk scalability, you're talking about when it's digital role play like this, the variables really aren't too significant. And so that you're getting a repeatable process that is proven to work. And the training is now then, not that it can scale laterally, but it can also turn over. So your next leaders coming in are now incorporating the same sort of ethos and methodology to a lot of their conversation. And so you get this sort of this snowball effect of really quality conversations. The measurable side of it, and this is one, and it's got two different sides to it. And I have to share this experience I had, and it was somewhat recently, and they said it to me, and I said, that's just amazing. And, we get the ROI from the top, somebody that would want to bring in a solution that works in digital role play. And the measurables help with that. The measurables help them see real measurable growth. Is the investment we're putting into our leaders transitioning or translating, or other words, translating into real growth, productivity, those sorts of things. And so you've got measurables for that you can actually have and be able to track those things, because you want to have confidence in the solutions you bring in. You want to know they're doing what they're supposed to. That's one of the big deals that I hear from executives. But on the participant side of it, it was interesting to hear the feedback from somebody who had a performance review, and in that review, their manager was using the data to talk about their growth, to have that context, and to bring the program full circle. Many people say programs are great, but our leadership never follows through with it and comes back to us about what we did in it. And so when they came back with the measurables to have the conversation, it built such an enormous amount of trust in that individual. They said what they basically were saying, this is the first time anybody's ever followed through with what we've done. It was fantastic to see my growth. I'm looking forward to the next program. Essentially, the fact that you have a measurable that you can bring back and close the loop on feedback built trust for whatever solution you bring next to that individual or the team. And so a lot of times companies are in this sort of, we're bringing stuff in and see if it sticks and this and that. And people are saying, I've done it 10 times. Well, this is another one of those programs or companies bringing in. This solution is helping bridge that gap and saying, oh, okay. Let me see what you have next versus I don't want to see what's next. So I just wanted to bring that point in there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Why don't we spend the last 15 minutes of this amazing call in just having an overview of what a digital role play looks like? And maybe you may want to add your comments on this. Well, I have just a few slides with some screenshot to just give a look, and maybe Henry has never seen a digital role play before, and so this may be useful to give a look at how it looks like. But before we start, I wanted to put here one specific sentence, which is, be careful, don't focus only on technology. You get better results if you blend technology and humans. What do you think about that, Alex?
Absolutely. And the programs and solutions I offer to my clients who are showing a need for training leaders and managers, it is a valuable piece, but you have to kind of come back in with the human side of it, the coaching sessions that help sort of work and take the data and then drill down into some real causations on things. And really oftentimes, you recently, a couple minutes ago, spoke about playing safe. Yeah. When others are engaged in this sort of scenario training, it's easier to then bring them in together as a group and do it together at that point versus, hey, here's a scenario, we're going to put you on the spot. And so you actually can get another multiplier by bringing that human interaction in and really bringing others who are working through the same sort of platform to now separate themselves from the wording of the role play or their sort of anxiety around it. But the coaching sessions with it are paramount. They really get them, it's a check and balance. You can drill down on the most important things. So I would really, but again, it's a 6.5 to the other sort of thing. They really complement each other very well. I would say the same thing about coaching without the digital side of it. The digital side of it is important too for many reasons that we've spoken about.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me share the next slide that shows, well, of course, a digital role play is made of several steps, several components, and namely, I would just mention 4 of them, which are the interactive interview, which is basically the interactive conversation. Then, of course, what we call the emotional feedback, which is a way of delivering I normally call it a slap on the face, because that's really amazing. You know that very well. Basically, the idea is that just after the conversation is gone, is finished, the character on the other side, which is, by the way, one pre-recorded professional actor normally, so it's not a puppet. Forget about puppets, cartoon, things like that. You have a professional actor that can actually show their emotions real time. So he goes back to his desk. He doesn't know we are actually still watching him, because that's a simulation, and he will start calling a friend or a colleague and telling them about the conversation they had with you. And that's a slap in the face, which it's a privilege you don't have in real life, because of course, each of us would pay gold for knowing what the other people think about what we did in that conversation. And by the way, what we normally do is we expect that those people are on the same line as we are in terms of the perception of the quality of the conversation, which is never the case. And by the way, these emotional feedbacks gives really slap on the face, because you will hear this guy telling things that he would never tell if he knew you were listening. And that's very important point. Then the third step is about the metrics, and the last one is about the augmented replay, which is something I would like to talk in a few minutes, but please go ahead.
And even I really want to bring this. You definitely brought in the emotional side. It's great. And when I do my skill gym sessions, I'm eager to hear that, what, the sneaking in and hearing what they're going to say. I mean, sometimes it's a slap in the face. Sometimes they actually talk about how well you did as well.
Yeah, that's a pat on the shoulder.
Just a pat on the shoulder. So it's great. I'm really like, okay, how did I do? But there's something before the conversation that I want to bring into it. And this is a skill in its own, Andre. Preparing for a conversation is so important. A lot of times leaders and managers just have it in their calendar, and they finished up one, they've got 5 minutes to shuffle through papers and then go have another one. And I can tell you, preparation for a meeting is almost as important for the meeting itself. Really, how you prepare is how you'll perform. And what Skill Gym allows you to do is also work on that skill of preparing for the meeting. The boxes beforehand that take you through, okay, what is the background story here? What are the objectives you're looking to complete? What is the leadership style that would be most constructive considering this individual? What sort of style is this person? That sort of information is so vital to you succeeding in that conversation, and just to go through it ahead of time. But the skill you're learning is the one of preparation, the one of I have to take a little bit of time, because they will know that. If you're in a conversation with somebody, and I know this unfortunately from my own experience and having not prepared, that person across from you knows when you haven't prepared in the conversation. And if you don't think that signals something to them for the next one conversation or in building trust, it does. People are very perceptive. And so when you spend a little bit of time preparing for conversations, the success rate is so much higher.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why this is one of the key points of the step-by-step methodology of Skill Gym. And once again, that's why in the slide I shown before, let me take it on once again, I was saying that don't just focus on technology. There's a human in the loop, but there is also a very important methodology. And one step of that methodology is making sure that the habit of preparing for the conversation becomes an habit in the simulation as well. That's a very important point.
And the last point I will say on the same sort of deal is, and this goes right along with the technology, body language. Yeah. We are training so many people these days on being able to read body language. And most people, most linguistic, researchers will tell you the majority of communication is body language. And Skill Gym, yeah, there you go. Real-time actors who are giving you this sort of feedback in body language. So you have to sort of be looking at what are they doing here right now? And that's, again, another thing you rarely get in scenario training and role play training that isn't digital, is it's very hard to simulate real-time behaviors, and so the nonverbal communication from this platform is fantastic.
Yeah, another thing that is very tough to simulate with other solution, but that Skill Gym does it very well, is about what we call the augmented replay. And I know you're very familiar with it. Let me just spend a few words and then I'll ask you about your experience with this tool. Well, basically, this is a way of reviewing your own conversation from a third party point of view. So basically, you will hear your part being told by a voiceover, and in the meanwhile you can check the guy having his mood, his body language, answering back, and on the overlay you will have this blue wave that tells you about the quality step by step of your approach, and then those balloons telling you more about what's going on in that very moment. So this is a very interesting tool because you can actually review your performance. This is another of those dreams coming through, because we always would like to have the recording of the conversation. We just had to go through that step by step and check out what didn't work at that very moment. But that's a great tool for coaching as well. What about this, Alex? How do you use the augmented replay?
I mean, this takes into account exactly what any sales consultant has told numerous people: record your sales calls. They do that because the value of replaying those calls and being able to hear yourself, hear the actions that you stepped, what did the other person say, and being able to train on top of your experiences, being able to go back into them is so important. So this does that, and that it captures it. What I had with a coaching client was, not only did we use this augmented replay to go back in and to look down, drill down and say, okay, what objectives did you struggle with? What parts of the conversations were there? And I know the slide doesn't show it, but there are more, when it says details and you go into it, you really get some key insights. Now, the person I was working with, they hit one objective, but not the other two. And the last one they didn't was really kind of closing the conversation, really getting that agreement. And they actually scored like a 0% on working with it. And when we went back and looked at it, we were able to find out what parts of the conversation led to not hitting that objective. What other ways could we have? And we didn't really focus on all the objectives. And, because again, back to the whole knowledge, too much of it coming in, you can only put back in and retain so much. And so it allowed us to kind of break up the conversation and just get better in one area. And then we can continue to get better in other areas. But this particular individual, scored a 0% and then looked at it and then went back through the simulation a few more times and played the role play. And of course, they're always shocked to see it's not the same role play. I mean, the intelligence here is not like you can go back and figure it out. I can assure you that. But when it came time to that closing part, there was this switch that she had mentioned, that our coaching conversation and where her development was specifically in the closing area. It triggered her to recall, I have to pay more attention right now in this conversation and really figure out how to get it up there. Now, she went and she did it again. She came back to me and we looked at it, and she improved in about 11% in that sort of closing. And she looked at me, she goes, 11%, that's awful. And I told her, I said, a day ago you were at 0. So for you to be able to turn around and get 11% growth after just being able to trigger back to that and being more engaged in that part of the conversation, to look at your options through a different lens and then make a decision that had at least some bit of impact, is significant. And you can see where it will continue to grow and grow. So the augmented replay, that's where we were really allowed to get in there and kind of the two of us were able to interact together within that scenario.
Yeah, let me spoil one thing. We are about to release the generation 2 of augmented replay in a few weeks. And you will be among the first ones to look at that. You will be crazy about that. But by the way, coming back to what you were saying, I have a consideration to share, because sometimes people, they think that 11% is not that much. because we are normally used to applying those figures and those numbers to totally different types of measurements, like, things about economics. But when we think about increase of skills, there are 2 points I would like to mark here. The first one is that 11% is an amazing percentage, because especially when you think about the time for getting there, which is typically a few weeks. And the other point is that whatever strategy different from this one wouldn't even allow you to measure that percentage.
Right.
We're not talking about reaching that percentage. We're merely talking about measuring that, which is almost unfeasible with any other type of strategy. And this goes along.
Totally. And to, and not just for somebody who's looking at those percentages and saying, well, how well have you done? For the person that's actually in there doing it, that participant in that, for them to see the growth themselves is better than, sometimes, because it builds that confidence. And yes, you want the perception for other people to see that you have grown as well, but you want to build your own confidence in it and be able to have that information like that is just, it's phenomenal. It really does change the way they view even their training. They're more eager to get back in there and to continue to work on it because they can in real time see their growth, which hasn't been done in my opinion properly.
Absolutely. So time flies talking with you. That was a random but still very interesting conversation. Henry, what's your takeaway? What do you think about today's discussion?
Thank you. You're on mute, buddy.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's a lot of great information that, again, I just, being in those scenarios myself can mirror and say that I definitely see the advantages of in the learning and development aspect, or training and development. What I wanted to kind of incorporate was, and I was trying to find it on my laptop, I have this model that is, as managers, we need to understand that some people are visual, some people are auditory learners. And so as managers, we need to really kind of incorporate an even mix, which is the point that you were making before. We can't just rely on technology, but we can't just rely on coaching either without technology. And then you had mentioned, Matteo, that there was kind of an emotional side to it as well. In the model that I have, and I really wish that I could find it, it's basically 4 circles that overlap in the middle, where you have people that need emotion, and then you have some people that need facts. And so it's literally just that center mass where all 4 circles are overlapping is kind of the sweet spot where people that are in training and development, or people that are coaches or managers, to really be effective, you need to kind of incorporate that as much as possible, whether that's in a one-on-one situation or whether it's in a group situation, especially in a group situation, because in a group situation, it's harder to tell in your group, am I dealing with all facts-based, or am I dealing with, all people that need kind of more of an emotional learning? Am I dealing with people that are all hands-on, or am I dealing with people that need verbal? And really just kind of incorporating that. That's a learned process. That is not something that is just you go sit through a webinar and you learn right off the bat. That is something that you actively have to practice. And in fact, to your point, Alex, it was in that webinar or in that seminar that you taught about being an active listener. I would say that by far that is one of the pillars of being an effective coach and effective manager, is being an active listener. If you're not listening, you're not going to be able to be effective.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally agree.
Great points there. And I like the points about the multiple learnings, and the fact that it is on digital even gets those kinesthetic learners to get their hands on it. They've got to click and select and work with it too. So you get kind of those modes.
Yeah, and again, a lot of that goes back to my coaching experience. Coaching individuals from various backgrounds that learn in various different kinds of ways. The way that I was able to become effective was to really incorporate just a very inclusive coaching style, and that allowed me to really help and hone those skills of being an effective coach, is really having to adapt to the people that I was interacting with.
Yeah, very, very clear. Makes a lot of sense to me, and I hear more and more about this approach, and makes a lot of sense to me. Absolutely. Good. So thank you so much for gathering together today. That was an amazing talk. And by the way, me and Alex, we will have more of this in the near future, and we will publish a calendar very soon on LinkedIn, and we will make available one landing page for registering to all of those. We're going to publish these on YouTube. And by the way, if you are watching that on YouTube, you may want to subscribe the channel, and because more will come, and we will be very happy to update you on new contents like this. Alex.
Just to wrap it up, we're going to have more of these, and we're very passionate about it, and we enjoy sharing it with everyone, and happy to have Hank and anybody to come on and interact with us and share with us. But again, it's all around conversation. So, if this is something that's up your alley and you want to start a conversation with us, we're happy to have them. And I appreciate, Andrea, your time, and I'm looking forward to our next one. And yeah, can't wait.
Thank you so much.